Today's daf, we're going to be learning a Sanhedrin daf Yudalid. We're going to start with the issue of semicha. Okay, we're talking about semicha for the Rabbanit. If you haven't heard yet, daf Mishalahen this week, right? It's our new column from Rabbi Yosi and Chamutal. They are back on, and this time in English, so you can hear maybe a bit more dramatic rendition of the story that we're going to learn today, and a little bit of added detail. So, what we really kind of ended with, and something that really didn't make a lot of sense, and it's kind of funny because we're gonna end today's stuff with also some lack of clarity about something, which is it says in a braita, it didn't say it in the Mishnah, but it said in the braita that there's smichat kinim, which is the kinim who put their hands on the parhalim davar shel tzibur, which that we already learned is done b'shlosha. That was in our Mishnah. But a braita added that also smicha, ordination. Smicha for the Rabbanut is done also with bishlosha. Now remember, ordination in those days isn't exactly the same as our smicha. Ordination in those days refers to the ability, and this is what the Gemara is going to focus on, to ladun dine knasot. You can only deal with fines and things like that if you actually have smicha. And it also meant being called Rebbe, which is why the Amoraim in Israel are called Rebbe, and the ones in Babylonia are not, because we're going to learn today that Rabbi Yehoshua and Levi is going to say we only do smicha in Israel. We can't do it outside of Israel, kind of similar to the Kiddush HaChodesh and Ibor Shana, which could only be done in Israel. And we'll get back to that later in today's daf. So we start with this issue that smicha is done b'shlosha based on a braita. And then the Gemara says we don't really get where you get shlosha from, because we have Moshe Rabbeinu who did it with one, right? It was him to Yoshua. And even if you say Moshe was representative of the court, then that would be the big Sanhedrin, which would be 71. And then you'd say you'd need 71. So where do we get to 3? We don't really have an answer to that question. And then the Gemara is going to continue with a question on this, because if you really need 3, we're going to see from this story that you don't really need 3. So let's start from 4 lines from the bottom, at least in my Gemara, at Yugimel Amud Bet. Ha'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Didn't Rabbi Yehuda say in the name of Rav, Biram Zachur Oto Ish Tov, this person is remembered for good? For Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava Shmo, his name is Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. You might remember him because he's one of the 10 martyrs in the prayer that we say on Yom Kippur about the 10 martyrs. She'ulmalehu nishtakhu dinei knasot miYisrael. If it weren't for him, we would have forgotten all about fines in Israel. Nishtakhu, they say, nigrosinu. How could you possibly say we would forget them just because of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava? You could always relearn them. Like, what do you mean forget them? So they say, no, we didn't mean forget them. What we meant was ela batlu dinei knasot Israel. There would be no judging of fines in Israel anymore. Okay, because what's the issue? Because without smicha, you can't do knasot, and he made sure to pass on smicha. We're going to learn that, right? You have to have smicha to be able to give smicha, and he was the last holdout. He was the last rabbi that had smicha, and what happened, or the last one willing to give out smicha. Now, why wouldn't other people be willing? Well, you'll see. The Romans is the Malchut HaRisha'ah. The Romans put a gzera on the Jewish people. They did a decree, Jews shekol somech yehareg. Okay, they were smart. They said if we don't allow people to do smicha anymore, right, that will destroy the Jewish people. So what will we do? And this is what they said: anyone who gives smicha to anyone will be killed. Kol hanismach yareg. Anyone who gets smicha will be killed. The whole city where someone does smicha, we're going to destroy that entire city. And all the area around it, the tchum, like tchum Shabbat, the 2,000 amma outside the city, which were considered the outskirts of the city, will also destroy that. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. So what did Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava do? He figured, let me get the least damage possible. So what did he do? Halach v'yashav lo ben shnei harim gedolin. He went between 2 big mountains. Uben shtei ayarot gedolot, between 2 big cities, which we'll see in a minute what they were. Uben shnei tchumei Shabbat, and between, meaning in an area that wasn't in the surrounding area of that city and not that city. In other words, he went really far out in between these 2 mountains. Ben Usha l'Shfar, okay, between these 2 cities. If you listen to Shimon Chamutal, they talk about it. Tzomet Somech in the north is actually based on this story. Okay, v'samach sham chamisha zkinim, and in those places, in between these 2 mountains, in the middle of nowhere, basically, he says, I'm giving smicha to these 5 zkinim. And you think this story is going to have a happy ending, right? He gives smicha to these 5 rabbis. Ve'elu hein, and who are they? And you're going to be You're going to say, oh, wow, good he did this. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Elazar ben Shamoa. These are of the most famous Tanaim that appear in the most Mishnayot. And he gave them smicha, okay, in an act of, right, defying the Roman decree, risking his life, he gives them smicha. Rav Avia mosif af Rabbi Nechemia. Rav Avia even adds Rabbi Nechemia to the list. He says it was also Rabbi Nechemia. Kevan shikiru oivehem bahem. They got trapped. They got found. Okay, even though you would think between the two mountains, right? You would think nobody would see, but no, the Romans find them. They chase them. Amar lahem banai rutzu. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, who's already old and can't run, says, "Listen, my children, run away, and it's fine. Leave me here." Amrulo, Rebbe, mate alecha. They say, "But what about you? We're not going to leave you here." Amar lahem, hareini mutal lefnehem ke'even she'en la hofchim. I'm going to just put myself before them like a stone that doesn't have anyone to turn it over. Meaning I'm basically submitting myself to them. What's also a stone? A stone has no feelings, no emotions, no nothing, right? He basically says, I'm not going to feel anything. I'm not going to care. I'm just going to let myself be killed by the Romans. And in fact, that's what happens. Amru lo zazu misham ad shenatsu bo 300 lumbiot shel barzel v'asu kikvara. Okay, they pierced him with 300 lumbiot. There's a bunch of different translations, but spears perhaps. And basically they made him like a sieve with holes all over his body. By the way, there's a reference to this in the Tanakh, not connected obviously with Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, but Yoshiyahu, the king, also gets shot 300 times. Doesn't say with spears, doesn't say with what, but they said they shot him 300 times at the end of Sefer. Actually comes up in Divrei HaYamim, the story. The story appears both in Melachim Bet and in Sefer Divrei HaYamim and Chronicles, but there it appears specifically that they shot at him 300 times. And that's our story. So he basically risks his life and actually gets killed. This is, like I said, you can read his story. You'll notice it next year, Yom Kippur, in Ela Ezkara, the prayer we say about the 10 martyrs, about his death. Now, and also in the keynote on Tisha B'Av, we also have a keynote about it. Now, why did we bring this? Because what do you see here? How many people gave smicha? One person, not three. Okay, so it looks like you really don't need three. So besides that, we didn't see a source for three. Also, we see a story. As the Gemara answer this very simply, it's a classic Gemara answer. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava achrine hava bahadei. Oh, there were two other people with him. Why didn't they mention them? Okay, they didn't want to, right? They didn't want to. They wanted to give him all the kavod for the story. They wanted the story to be all about him. So they didn't mention that there were two other rabbis who also risked their lives to do this, but he was the leader, and therefore he gets the story named after him. Why do I say it's a classic answer? Because there's no way to know that there were two other people. In fact, if you read the simple reading of the story, it sounds like he alone risked his life. But they say, since it's so obvious that you could only do smicha with three, there's no way he did it with one, and therefore it was done with three, and we just don't hear about them. But, it is interesting to think about, because the simple reading is, especially if you had to risk your life, perhaps it sounds like he was the only one willing to risk his life, and not clear that there were other people as well. But the Gemara says, well, since it says three in the Mishnah, it must be three in the Mishnah. And let's try to just resolve this by assuming there were two other people with him. Okay, now we have a side question. Okay, and as Becky pointed out, these were all students of Rabbi Akiva. So I didn't check out if all of them were, but now we're going to talk about Rabbi Meir, who is definitely a student of Rabbi Akiva. And now we're going to see Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava samche, but Rabbi Meir was musmach by Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. V'ha amar Rabbi bar bar Chana amar Rabbi Yochanan, kol omer Rabbi Meir lo smacho Rabbi Akiva eno ela to'eh. Rabbi bar bar Chana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, anyone who says that Rabbi Meir was not musmach, he didn't get his ordination from Rabbi Akiva, is mistaken, okay, is wrong. Now, this is a very interesting use of this term, okay? And if somebody wants, they could do a search for this. Pretty easy nowadays, right? Go on Safari and do a search for the words, eno ela to'eh. Usually, from my memory, it comes up in the context of anyone who said that David HaMelech sinned, eno ela to'eh. And exactly what you're saying, Miriam. It's usually about a Tanakh story. And it's usually about saying someone didn't sin, okay? Where it's the rabbi's attempt to say, right? It looks like from the simple reading that the rabbi, that the character sinned, but But no, it can't possibly be. They didn't really sin, and they come up with some other explanation to what they did. It wasn't really as bad as we think it is. And it's a way of trying to say, oh, we think of these great people and they couldn't have sinned, and really they didn't sin. It's a way of justifying or kind of explaining their actions in some other way. And it's usually used in this context. Why? And what's the point? The point is, it's when somebody feels very strongly about something. If you say otherwise, you are mistaken, right? It's where they want to make a very strong point. Why it was so important, and I don't know the answer to this, I leave it to you to think about. It was so important for people to think that Rabbi Akiva was the one who gave smicha to Rabbi Meir, and that's why Rabbi Yochanan was quoted by Rabbi Bar Chana as having said, if you don't say that, you're totally mistaken. It's clear that Rabbi Akiva gave smicha to Rabbi Meir. I don't know why that was so important to him, but it was obviously very important to him, and you can tell that from the language he uses. So how do we rectify? How do we resolve that with our story? Our story says that Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava gave smicha to Rabbi Meir, not Rabbi Akiva. To which they answer, Samche Rabbi Akiva v'lo kiblo, Samche Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava v'kiblo. Because Rabbi Akiva gave smicha to Rabbi Meir, but the people didn't accept it because Rabbi Meir was too young at the time, the commentaries say. But when Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava did it, it was accepted. So there you have that. And perhaps maybe that gives us a bit of a hint as to why he wanted to say very strongly that clearly Rabbi Akiva gave smicha, because people didn't accept the smicha that Rabbi Akiva gave, and maybe that's why he wanted to make a point about it. By the way, I didn't have a chance to read it, so I can't say much about it, but I saw the flashback this week. I meant to read it before class and didn't get to. It was also about this topic of smicha and about this story. So you can read more about it in Shuli's article about this story. And perhaps she addresses these points, I'm not sure. Like I said, I didn't have a chance to read it, but that's our section. So we started with smicha. We raised a question, number one, and that was yesterday, which is, where do we get that smichas with three people? And kind of leave it as an open question because we really didn't find the source. And number two, it looks from the story that smicha is not with three people, but they resolved that as well. And then we just had a side point about, could it really be true that Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava gave smicha to Rabbi Meir when it says that Rabbi Akiva gave smicha to Rabbi Meir? Okay. Again, there's also, you just have to remember, these are legends, right? The story of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava is clearly a legend, right? Whether all the details are accurate and whether, they say it was 5 zkenim and these were the zkenim and someone else added Rabbi Nechemia, you can see that there could be also a little bit of lack, maybe the story happened, we're not sure who it happened with, and some details could possibly change. Okay. Anyway, very interesting story. We're going to move on now. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. Ein smicha b'chutz ha'aretz. So there is no smicha outside of Israel. What does that mean? Well, in simple terms, it means you can't give smicha to someone outside of Israel. You can only do the act of ordination of rabbis. Again, not regular ordination, what we do nowadays. What we do nowadays doesn't have the power of the smicha they did in those days. Again, one of the biggest ramifications being dinei knasot, that you can't rule in dinei knasot, fines, okay, all the fines that we've discussed throughout, like kefel, tashlumei arba chamisha, for theft. We have all the knasot in the Torah, the motzi shemra, the ones mefateh. There's all sorts of knasot. You don't do that in chutz la'aretz. Okay, you can't give smicha, and then the rabbis can't do it there. Now, let's just talk a little bit of history. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi is first generation Amora. Okay, so why is that important? Well, it's exactly the time when the Rav leaves Israel, goes to Babylonia, and sets up the first big yeshiva there. Right, there was learning there before, but Rav was a real big gadol, and he starts upsetting, and the center starts to shift. Until that point, Israel was the center, and the center starts to shift. And as a result, in Israel, there becomes this power struggle because things are moving toward Babylonia, but the rabbis in Israel don't want to lose their authority, and they exert their authority in certain areas, and two of them happen to be areas that we've been discussing. One is Ibor Shana and Kiddush HaChodesh. Okay, apropos, it's Rosh Chodesh today, right? Today is the 30th day of Kislev, but it's Rosh Chodesh, Tevet, right? So it's a matter, and by the way, this is one of the months that even in our calendar, some years yes, some years no. Some years it's 30 days, some years it's 29 days, the month of Kislev, and it kind of differs depending on the year and what the needs are. Obviously now we have a set calendar, but it's of the months, usually it's very clear, 29, 30, 29, 30, 29, 30, and there's just a few months that, well, really, it's mainly Tevet that switches to sometimes be 30, sometimes 29. And the big question here is, the big issue is the rabbis wanted to say, we're in charge of the calendar and we're in charge of smicha, because those are very big, powerful things, right? Determining the date of the holiday is very big. And determining who's a rabbi is also very critical. So it was one of the ways that they kept their Israel being the center of authority. Now the Gemara wants to know, my ein smicha, what do we mean by this? Maybe it means that even if you have smicha and you go to Babylonia, you can't do dine knasot. But that's not true. V'hatnan, it says in the Mishnah, Sanhedrin noheget bein ba'aretz bein b'chutz la'aretz. You can have a Sanhedrin in chutz la'aretz. So as long as your rabbi's got smicha abroad, in Israel, when they're in Babylonia, let's say, if there's a Sanhedrin there, they could rule dine knasot. What it means is you can't give smicha outside of Israel. So now they're going to still kind of try to get at it and suggesting, Pshita, somchim b'chutz la'aretz v'nismachim ba'aretz ha'aminan delo. It's obvious that if you have, now we're going to start talking about distance. Let's say you have people who want to give smicha to people who are not near them. And you want to either send a letter saying, I give smicha to this person, or you want to send a messenger to say, go give smicha on my behalf to this person. So obviously, if the somchim are in chutz la'aretz, the people who want to give the smicha are outside of Israel, and the nismachim are ba'aretz, and the people who want to get smicha are in Israel, and they want to send a letter or a messenger to give smicha to the people in Israel, ha'amrinan delo. Of course you can't do that, because if the somchim, the ones who are giving smicha, are outside of Israel, of course they can't give smicha to people in Israel when they're not near them, because in Babylonia you don't give smicha. So if the people wanting to give smicha are in Babylonia, even if the ones accepting it are in Israel, that's definitely not going to work. But the question is, what if somchim ba'aretz v'nismachim b'chutz la'aretz ma'nev? You can imagine why the Babylonians are asking this question, because they want to know, what if there's people in Israel who want to give smicha to us rabbis in Babylonia? Maybe that would work. Well, Tashma, they're going to bring some sources that make it very clear that you can't do this, and you can't do any sort of distance smicha, even if you're, let's say, in one area of Israel to a different area in Israel, because we're going to learn here smicha has to be done in person. And we're going to see a whole bunch of stories where rabbis tried to give smicha to other rabbis, but couldn't, because they either weren't in the same place, or they couldn't find 3 rabbis to do the smicha ceremony in the same place. Okay, and because they couldn't do it physically, they couldn't do it. And that's going to prove that there's no way you could send a letter from Israel to Babylonia to give smicha to someone or send a messenger. So Tashma, let's learn it from here. To Rabbi Yochanan, have a mitzvah alav de Rav Shimon bar Abba, de lo have a gabayu de lismachei. Rabbi Yochanan really wanted to give smicha to this Rav Shimon bar Abba, but he wasn't near him, so he couldn't give him smicha. Rabbi Shimon ben Zerud v'chadimei. Now we're going to hear a story about 2 rabbis. One was Rabbi Shimon ben Zerud, and somebody who was with him, Umanu Rabbi Yonatan ben Achmai. These are not really known rabbis. Interesting that they bring a story about not such known rabbis. And some people say, Amri la Rabbi Yonatan ben Achmai, v'chad imei Amri Rabbi Shimon ben Zerud. Okay, it's either about one, and with him was another, or it was about the other one, and with him was the other. Okay, either which way, it's about the same 2 rabbis, just a different way of saying it. Chad to have a gabayu samchuhu, v'chad to have a gabayu lo samchu. Also with Rabbi Yochanan, one of them was with Rabbi Yochanan, he was able to give him smicha, and the other one wasn't with Rabbi Yochanan physically, and therefore he wasn't able to give him smicha. Another story. Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Yoshaya have a kamishtake Rabbi Yochanan lemismachinu. Rabbi Yochanan really wanted to give smicha to Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Yoshaya. Lo have a mistayim milta, but he just never was able to do it. Okay, unclear whether, some people say because he couldn't ever get 2 other rabbis to be with him. Okay, in order to give smicha, you have to be a musmach. You have to have smicha yourself. There's a big debate, and some people say this story proves that you need rabbis who all 3 rabbis need to have smicha, and that's why it was so hard for Rabbi Yochanan to find 2 other rabbis. Some people think it's not such high criteria. It could be, I'm trying to think, was it Rashi who said this? No. Basically, Rashi just says it was that he couldn't find another 2 people to be with him on the panel to basically give the smicha, and that's why he was never able to give smicha to these rabbis. Okay, you see they obviously did get smicha at some point because they're called Rebbe, but Rabbi Yochanan was upset that he didn't get to do it. And then another story. So wait, let's finish this story. He couldn't do it. Havakamitz star tuva, and Rabbi Yochanan was very upset that he couldn't give smicha to these 2 rabbis. Amrule, they said to him, Lo nitztaramar, don't be too upset about this. Da'anami debate Eli ka'atinan, because we come from the house of Eli, and what's known about the house of Eli? Remember, we had all those stories. Atumi mulai, they come from this cutoff family, and it's from Eli's family. Well, we're going to see now, what does it say about Eli's family? Okay, he's the Kohen, if you remember, in the beginning of Sefer Shmuel. Da'amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman, Amar Rabbi Yonatan, minayin she'ein nismechin lebeit Eli. The people in Beit Eli don't get smicha. Okay, so basically they said to him, don't worry, we're from Eli's family, and kind of we were cursed that we don't get smicha. We can't become rabbis that are ordained. Shenemal, because it says, Lo yezaken bebeitcha kol hayamim. One of the things that Eli is punished, when he gets punished, it says, Lo yezaken bebeitcha. There won't be an elderly in your house all the days. Now, how do they explain this? My zaken. What does it mean, zaken, an elder person? Well, Elam is zaken mamash. If you want to say what would be kind of obvious, and we've always learned this, they're cut off people. What does it mean they're cut off people? They die young. Why they die young? Because it says you won't have old people in your family. That means you die young. And we want to say it means smicha and not zaken as a rabbi figure. So if you're going to say zaken mamash, haktiv kol marbi beitcha yamutu anashim. It already says that. It says all the people in your house are going to die as anashim, which means die young, okay, and not as zkenim. So it already says that, and therefore the line lo zaken bebeitcha kol yamim must mean ela smicha. That must be adding something additional. They don't get smicha, so don't be upset because we come from the house of Eli. Another story about smicha. Rabbi Zera, this is a different story. And this gets to something we can all identify with. Rabbi Zera have a mitamer lemismecha. He was hiding out. He didn't want, okay, they wanted to give him smicha. If you remember, Rabbi Zera comes from Babylonia. He makes aliyah. He goes to Israel. And he doesn't want to get smicha. Why doesn't he want to get smicha? Well, da'amar Rabbi Elazar la'olam havikavel v'kayam. You should always be humble. Okay, Rashi says kavil is dark, but what it means is you should always be humble and you will live a long life. In other words, better to be humble as opposed to, right? If you take, this is like not to go after kavod, not to try to have power, a position of power, because basically, right, as we know, power corrupts. People become arrogant. So, but what happened? But then you heard Rabbi Elazar say something else. Well, you heard, I'm not sure if it's, yeah, it could be the same, it must be the same Rabbi Elazar. Well, you don't get to a position of power until you actually get absolved of all your sins. So he said, oh, this must be, and it's interesting that the same person said both this and that, because on the one hand, he was saying, and maybe as a result of the first statement, people stopped wanting positions of power. And then he had to say something to get people to want to do it and encourage people, because otherwise, right? And otherwise you always end up with the wrong people in power. You don't want people in power that are arrogant and it's going to get to their heads and will corrupt. So in order to encourage people, it's not clear if he said one after the other, but he also said that when you go up to greatness, you get pardoned from all your sins. And therefore, and therefore he made himself found. Okay, he basically stopped hiding out, so they wouldn't give him smicha and allowed himself to get smicha, which we see he got smicha because he's called Rabbi Zera and not Rav. Kisamchu Rabbi Zera, when they gave him smicha. Now we're going to go off a bit on a tangent and see some songs that people sang to different leaders. Shaur lehachi, they sang to him the following thing: Lo kacha velo strak velo pirkus. Okay, not eyeshadow, not makeup, right? This guy doesn't need any makeup. It's not about the look. It's not about, the externals, the yalat chen. He has a real good inside, right? He's really good on the inside. And this is about him being humble. Ki samchu Rabbi Ami Rabbi Asi, when these two guys got smicha, these two rabbis, shaur lehachi, they sang to them the following: Kol min dein smuchulane. Anyone like this guy and anyone like this guy, right? These two rabbis, they've got it. You should give smicha to people that are like them. Lo tismachu lana, and don't give smicha. Lo misar mistin, velo misar misin, va'amrila lo michamisin, velo mitor misin. Okay, these are very strange words, not such common words. What do they mean? Either sarmitin or sarmisin, or chamisin or tormusin. Okay, what do these words mean? So Rashi helps us with 3 out of the 4. Rashi says that sarmisin is hafchanim, like l'sares mikaz, to chop it in the middle and kind of flip the order. So it's people who flip the reasons in the Torah, like they just mess things up. Sarmitin is like smartut, okay, which Rashi says, okay, smartut is a rag, a shmata, but they don't give good explanations for what they say. Chamisin is like chamsanin, like people who steal. What do they steal here? They're stealing information because they're mon'im milomar tamei Torah. They don't explain things properly, so they keep it to themselves. That's not a good thing either. And Rashi says about tormisim, we don't know what this is. Some people translate tormusim. Okay, Rashi doesn't know, but other people say, well, instead of a tet, read it as a taf. Tormusim are a type of bitter legume. So it's like something about bitterness. Okay, whatever it is, it's obviously a negative word. Okay. Rabbi Avau ki avaate mimitiv to lebei kesar. Okay, a third story about people singing to other people. So Rabbi Yehuda, he would come from the yeshiva to the Beit Kesar. Rabbi Yehuda was known that he had a lot of, he was a politician, and besides being a great rabbi, he was also had relations with the house of the Roman Kesar, the Roman emperor. Nafka matroniata the Beit Kesar Masharianle. So the Roman women, the noble women, would come out from the house of the Kesar and sing to Rabbi Yehuda. They had a lot of respect for him, and this is what they would sing. Rabba de'ime, he's a leader for his nation. Midabrana de'umte. Remember, we had the dabar. If you didn't read Shuli's article about it, you can read it now. About Dabar being a leader, like in Yadber, Yadber also comes from there, from in the Tfilah for the Chayalim. Midabarna du'umate, he's a leader of his nation. It's just saying in different words. Butzina dinahori, he's the light that lights up, right, to everybody. Apropos Hanukkah. Baruch matiach l'shalom. Okay, you should go walk blessed. You should be blessed as you in whatever you do. Okay, so here you see he got respect from other nations as well. Okay, that's the end of our semicha section. Now we're moving on to Arifat Eglah b'shlosha. So now we go to the next section, which the Mishnah showed there was a machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Is it 5 according to Rabbi Yehuda? Do you need 5 judges for measuring when you have a dead body in between 2 cities? You have to measure to the closest city, and then the closest city needs to do an Eglah Rufa ceremony. So the measuring is done by the Zkenim. We'll see it in the pasuk in a minute. And it's either 3 or 5. So now we're going to have a braita that shows the source of the machloket, and we're going to have the ping pong about the psukim, like we've seen before. Tanu Rabbanan, yatzuz keinecha v'shoftecha. Okay, so the zkenim, the shoftim, are going to go out. It says here, umadidu al ha'arim asher svivat halal, and then they measure. So now we have keinecha shnayim, shoftecha shnayim. Oh, there you have it. Zkenim are 2, shoftim are 2. You don't want an even number, so you add 1 more, you get to 5. That's divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon Omer, he ignores the shavtecha. You're gonna have to see what does he do with that. That's her first question. He says it's just kenecha. That's 2. You add a third, so it's not an even number, and you end up with 3. Rabbi Shimon, what does he do with the shavtecha? That means it has to be from the great Sanhedrin, from the 71. You have to take from the best of your judges to go measures, but you only take 3. Okay, this kenecha is how many? The shavtecha is what kind? For Rabbi Yehuda, where does he learn that it has to do with miyuchadim? Everyone thinks it has to be from the Sanhedrin Agdolah. So if his word shavtecha is already used, where's he going to learn the miyuchadim from? Rabbi Yehuda means ziknei kenecha nafke. Could have just said zkenei, and that already is plural. Why did it say kenecha yours, which kind of like defines it more? That must mean special. For Rabbi Shimon, why doesn't he learn it that way? Because he says, right, there's different levels. If it just said ziknei, I would have thought havamina ziknei shuk. I would have thought any elders in the shuk, not necessarily knowledgeable people. Kata rachmanas kenecha. The Torah says kenecha to teach you. It has to be judges, but not necessarily from the great Sanhedrin. So iktivs kenecha avamina Sanhedrin ktanat. If it just says kenecha, I would have thought, and that's where Rabbi Yehuda gets from the Sanhedrin Agdolah, the big one. But Rabbi Shimon says, what do you mean? Kenecha just tells you it has to be real judges, not just random elderly people on the street. Or any people on the street. And that's why you need shoftecha. Going back to Rabbi Shimon, who doesn't have shoftecha free to teach you another 2 judges. Rabbi Yehuda, gamar ziknes kene. So now, why doesn't Rabbi Yehuda learn it that way? So in other words, again, if you go with Rabbi Yehuda's kenes kenecha, that would only get you 2 judges, not necessarily judges from the great Sanhedrin. So where does he get judges from the great Sanhedrin? So now we have to explain them differently. Rabbi Yehuda gamar ziknes kene v'samchu ziknei ha'idat yidehem, from the parhalim davar shel tzibur, where it says kene, and there it has to be from the Sanhedrin Agdolah. The same word appears there and here. Therefore, we're going to learn from one to the other. And then the Gemara says that can't be that's what he says, because he yalif leilaf kula mehata. Then he would learn everything from there. from this kenim, also the 5 from there. So you wouldn't need a special drasha to say kenecha tu, shoftecha tu, because if he has a gzeira sheva from the paralim davar shel tzibur, he'll just learn the opinion from there about everything. And then you don't need this drasha. So then this drasha is irrelevant. Kenecha tu, shoftecha tu, you don't need that. So in the end, they're going to say, okay, he does learn shoftecha like Rabbi Shimon. Shoftecha really teaches you miyuchadim shebeshoftecha. He doesn't have a gzeira shava. Forget that gzeira shava, because that would basically make this whole drasha irrelevant or not needed. So it must be he really does learn shoftecha. So as he learned v'shoftecha, also adds another 2. Well, elavav de v'shoftecha, because it says kenecha and shoftecha. It could have said kenecha shoftecha, and then you would have known what kind of kenim the best, right? The ones from the Sanhedrin Gdolah. The fact that it adds a vav teaches you that we can learn 2 things from that word. Also, that they add another 2. And ending our ping pong, Rabbi Shimon vav lo darish. We just say Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold by vavs. Okay, he doesn't darish in that. Elameata, but wait, from there, we have another problem. If you're going to say kenechas tu, shoftecha tu, or if you're going to just say kenechas tu, and shoftecha you teaches you, right, specifically what kind of judges. But still, we have other verbs in that sentence. And if you remember, we've been darshaning verbs. Every time it says something in plural, that means add another 2. So look at that sentence. That sentence says v'yatzu kenecha b'shoftecha umadidu. V'yatzu shnayim umadidu shnayim. They go out and they measure. That's already another 2 places where it's all said in plural. And that should be the Rabbi Yehuda Tisha. For Rabbi Yehuda, we get up to 9, and Rabbi Shimon, you get to 7, Shiva. Well, no, because Hahumi Baile, you need those 2 words for other drashot, and therefore they're not free to teach you numbers. Hahumi Baile lechidetanya v'yatzu hem v'lo shluchan umadidu afilu nimtza ba'aliyah le'ir tzarich la'asok b'midida. Those words teach you the following. Yatzu means they have to go out from the great Sanhedrin. They can't send messengers instead of them. And madidu means even if it's so clear, you're in between 2 cities, but it's obvious that it's closer to one than the other, you don't even need to measure. Well, you need to measure anyway. It's a mitzvah to measure even when it's obvious. Okay, that takes us to the top of Amud Bet. So now we're going to move on, although within this topic, we had Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, where we get to 5, where we get to 3. That was our drashot, and why we didn't get to more. Now we're going to point out, Matnitin de Loki Haitana. Our Mishnah, obviously, by bringing just these 2 opinions and not a third, obviously doesn't hold by the following opinion. Titania, as it says in a braita. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Omer, v'yatzus kenecha b'shoftecha, kenecha zo Sanhedrin, shoftecha ze melech v'kohen gadol. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov adds this other thing. It's not just that you need the Sanhedrin, but you also need the melech and the kohen gadol. You need a king and the high priest. Okay, the king and the high priest. They have to be part of the Egla Rufa ceremony. By the way, you can see how important they thought this was. People from the Sanhedrin Gdolah have to come out, and even according to Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, the king and the high priest. How do we get this? The shoftecha is the king and the high priest. Well, melech dichtiv melech b'mishpat yamid aretz. It's a pasuk in Mishlei that connects the king with judge, shofet, mishpat, which is shoftecha. Kohen gadol dichtiv uvat el kohanim haleviim ve'el shofet. There's a pasuk in the Torah which says you go to the Kohen and the Levi, who presumably in the Torah are considered the judges, and then it says, and to the judge. What does it mean, the judge? Who's the judge over the Kohanim and the priests and the Levites? Obviously, the Kohen Gadol, as we talked about in Safrai. As Safrai pointed out in Mishnah Yisrael, that often the Kohen Gadol was the head of the Sanhedrin. And from here you see that the Shofet is clearly the Kohen Gadol. So that's where Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov gets it from. But now the big question comes in, which is Ibayalu. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov b'chad palit or b'tarte palit? Now, what did he say? He said you need a king and you need a high priest. But how many judges? Did he agree with either Rabbi Yehuda 5 or Rabbi Shimon 3? Or did he have a different opinion about how many judges were needed? Here are our possibilities. B'melech v'kohen gadol pligi. Notice he says kenecha is the Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin could mean judges. It could mean the whole Sanhedrin. Okay, so that's our question. B'melech v'kohen gadol pligi. Is he just arguing and that he needs within the 3 people that you need, or the 5 people, you need a king, the king, and the kohen gadol? Aval b'Sanhedrin, but in terms of how many people, Ika Rabbi Yehuda, Ika Rabbi Shimon, he thinks so, or either 3 or 5. Who just disagrees with the makeup of those people. O Dilma b'Sanhedrin nami pligi. Da'amar kula Sanhedrin be'ina. Maybe he thinks all 71 people of the high court need to come, and in addition, you need the king and the Kohen Gadol. Or the Kohen Gadol could be he was in the Sanhedrin Agdolah, but either which way, you need at least 71. So we're not sure. Comes Rav Yosef and he says, I have an answer. And it's going to be a little, it'll take a little while to understand. He's going to talk about a totally different topic. From there, we'll get to his answer. I'm Rav Yosef, Tashma. Let's learn from here. We're talking about a Zakeh Mamre. A Zakeh Mamre is one of the people in the Sanhedrin who decides he's a judge. Okay, he doesn't have to be in one particular, right? He's in a court. And he disagrees with the majority opinion. And then it goes all the way to the Supreme Court, basically, which, right, we call the Sanhedrin, the great Sanhedrin. And he says, this is what I learned. This is, okay, we're going to learn all about him later in the Masechet. And they rule against him. Majority rules, and he's wrong. Okay, he can't teach that anymore. And if he goes out and teaches, he gets killed. He's called a rebellious elder, one who goes against the court in a very clear way. And he goes specifically against the high court. So now, and usually we're going to learn this right now, this has to happen in Lishkat HaGazit, where he goes into the chamber in the temple where the Sanhedrin sits, and they rule against him there. So now this braita talks about a case where Mitza'ana Beit Pagi v'himra lehem. He finds them in Beit Pagi. Okay, where Beit Pagi is, near the walls, inside the walls, right outside the walls of the city of Jerusalem. It's certainly not in the temple. He finds the Sanhedrin there. And himra lehem. And he disagrees with them. They have this conversation instead of in the court. They have this conversation on the street or outside by Beit Pagi. And he disagrees with them. You might think that if he goes out and teaches against their ruling, he'd be killed. Well, as I said before, Lishkat HaGazit is where it has to happen, in the place, in the temple. Doesn't happen in the temple, he doesn't get killed. Okay, it's not the classic din of a Zakeh Mamre. So now they say, well, how did he meet the Sanhedrin on the street? Okay, dinafik kama. Okay, how many people did he meet here? Okay, was it part of the Sanhedrin, the whole Sanhedrin? Well, if it's Ilem Amiksatan, if it's just some of them, well, you wouldn't say he's not a Zakeh Mamre because they didn't do it in Lishkat HaGazit. You'd say he's not a Zakeh Mamre because maybe the majority that's inside agrees with him, right? Maybe the ones that are inside agree with him. So you can't even think, right? No. Anyway, you're not a Zakeh Mamre, but it should be you're not a Zakeh Mamre because only a minority of the court ruled against you. You have to have the majority rule against you. Elapshita dinafikulu. So it must be they all came in. Now, why are the people in the Sanhedrin on the street? We're going to learn that they're not allowed to be. If they were going out just for fun, right, or for just have a walk, they're not allowed to leave. Obviously, during the day we're talking about. Anyway, only judgments happen during the day. V'haktiv shvarech agan hasal al yachsar hamazik. Okay, this is understood. Shvarech is understood. It's pasuk in Shir Shirim. It's understood to be srara, which is, prominence, rulers. Al yachsar hamazik. This means in the court of the Sanhedrin, the way they understand this pasuk, you can't have less than a third. There always has to be a third in the Sanhedrin. You can't all leave the Sanhedrin. Certainly not for a dvar reshut. Elapshita, why else would they have left the Sanhedrin here? In other words, what they're assuming is since they say it's the location that's the issue, it must be the majority of the court was out. Maybe they were all out. What were they all doing out, though? They can't go out for dvar reshut. Elapshita lidvar mitzvah. They must have gone out for a mitzvah. Hechidami, what kind of mitzvah? What mitzvah with the Sanhedrin Agdolah? Remember what they rule on. Rule if there's a capital crime relating to the Kohen Gadol or something like that. You don't go out of the court for that. Lav l'mididat eglah, it must be for the eglah rufa. And then you'd say, right, because to measure the city, you'd have to leave. So now you see that there's a reason why the Sanhedrin all left and why they bumped into the Zakeh Mamre on their way out, right? It must be they were going to do the eglah rufa. And then you would say, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, and this must be according to Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, because the whole court doesn't need to leave according to the other opinions. All you need is 3 or 5 of them. Now, Mar Kulis Sanhedrin. So Rabbi Yosef says, based on this, it must be they hold the whole Sanhedrin needs to go. He holds that way. But Abaye, who's Rabbi Yosef's Talmud, who often disagrees with him, says, Amar le Abaye lo, kigon shiatzulo, sifa le'irba ala zarot. Wait, there's other reasons why you leave. You leave to expand the borders of Jerusalem. Keditnan, emosifim ala irva ala zarot, or the Azara. Okay, but specifically here we're talking about they must have left even farther than the Azara. They left to expand, to talk about expanding the borders of Jerusalem. That's one of the things, the Court of 71. So it could be that. So you don't have a proof that it was for Eglah Rufa. But in the end, Tanya Kavatei Rav Yosef, there is a source that supports Rav Yosef's reading. Mitzana Beit Pagi v'imra alehem, the same story. They find him in Beit Pagi. Kigon shiatzu lemididat eglau losifa li'ir v'alazarod. Here they give two possible reasons why this braita has more expanded version. Like, for example, if they went out to the Egla Rufa to measure, or they went to add to the city. So here you see it could be they went out for the Egla Rufa, and then the only way that could be was if you hold by Rabbi if it would have to be Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, and it would have to be that he holds that the whole Sanhedrin has to go out, and that's our proof. You might have thought he's a Zakei Mamre, Talmud Lomar v'kam tabalita lamakom elameitra makom golim. Okay, and that's just the end of that braita. Okay, he doesn't get killed because it wasn't done in the temple. Okay, now that's the end of the section on Egla Rufa. Now, so in the end, even though the Mishnah said 2 opinions, 3 and 5, we now see there's a third opinion, which is number 1, you need a Kohen Gadol and a king to be in that group. And it seems, at least the way Rav Yosef proved it, that also you need the entire Sanhedrin to go. Neta Revayu Maser Sheni She'en Damav Yiduim B'Shlosha. Okay, the Neta Revayu, which we're not going to focus on now, but the Maser Sheni, which is the produce you bring in the years 1, 2, 4, and 5 of the Shemitah cycle, you bring to the temple, but you redeem them onto coins. So the value, right, how to come up with the value of what your fruits are worth has to be done in front of 3. But only if they're ein damav yiduim, only if their value is not known. In other words, if they're apples and everyone knows the price of apples in the shuk, then it's obvious. But we're talking about things that aren't known. What would that be? So that's the first question. And the second question is going to be, who are the 3? To answer both those questions, like what kind of people make up the 3 in this case, to answer that question, we're going to have 2 different braitot. Tanu Rabbanan, Ezu Ma'aseh Sheni She'en Damav Yiduim. So the braita expands. Our Mishnah is pretty straightforward and simple, doesn't really expand on anything. So we bring the braitot that do, which is what we've been doing throughout this whole chapter so far. Peirot Shehir Kivu V'yayin She'iklim U'ma'ot She'chlidu. Okay, these are fruits that rot or grains that rotted, wine that starts going bad, and money that starts getting rotten. So if you have all those things need evaluation, and since there's no clear value in the shuk, because people don't sell those in the shuk, because they're already getting ruined, so that's what you need 3 for. Tanu Rabbanan, now we're going to talk about another braita that's going to prove what it explains to us, who are the 3. You need people who are in the business of evaluating money, okay? They're evaluating items. They're lekuchot, or purchasers, but what it means is they're like professional purchasers. You can't use people that don't understand the value, right? How to value things. Makes sense. This is the fascinating thing. You could even have a Gentile, because if he knows the price of money, that's all you need to do. You just need a valuation of money. Even if one of them is the owner. Okay, this is right. The person himself who needs to redeem it could be one of the 3. Okay, the commentaries do comment that you can't have both the Gentile and the person himself. You need one of the 3 being either an owner or one of the 3 being a Gentile. It would be okay because you still have 2 others, but you can't have both. 2 out of 3 being that. By Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Yirmiyah asks classic questions, either nuniki or trying to get to the real, like understanding it better. What if you have 3 people who are partners with each other, and then their way of evaluating is kind of the same because they're on the same team, so to speak. So maybe you need 3 for diversity of opinions, and here you wouldn't get diversity. So Tashma, let's learn from here. A man and his 2 wives, here you see it could be women also. His 2 wives the 3 of them together could evaluate. And aren't they partners? They're all together in money usually, right? The husband and the wife. So they say, no, that doesn't prove anything. Dilma Kagomra Papa Ubat Abba Surah. You could look up, there was a story we learned about her. Her father was very wealthy. And what they are assuming here, even though I couldn't find a Gemara that supported this, but that she was one of those women who said, if you're remembering what we learned, you could say, Eini nizonet ve'eini osa. I don't want your food. Don't feed me food, and I'm going to keep my own salary. And she kept herself independent. And so that would be an example where they're not together in money. So you could have a husband and wife that weren't, and maybe that source was talking about a husband with his 2 wives who each were financially independent, and therefore it wouldn't be an indicator of partners and whether partners could do it together. So we're ending up without an answer. Last section for today. Hekdesho b'shlosha. Okay, this is valuations of movable items. Okay, so if you look, and I recommend you look, it'll be a little helpful, but if you look, you don't have to, but in Chapter 27 of Vayikra is all the section about erchin, which is what we're talking about here, the valuations of people. Then we have valuations of animals, which are the movables. And then we have valuations of land. Now, the key thing we're going to get to here is that the word Kohen appears 10 times. There actually appears 11, but one time isn't in the sense of the Kohen evaluates. In terms of the Kohen evaluating, the word Kohen appears, the character of the Kohen who's evaluating all these properties appears 10 times. So the Mishnah says Hekadesh is done with 3. And if you remember, we said that on land, it's done with 10, and one of them has to be a Kohen. So now the Gemara says, just like we said earlier, Matnitin de Loki Haitana, our Mishnah doesn't follow this opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov again. Titania, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Omer, Afilu Tzinor Shel Hekdesh Tzricha Sara b'nei Adam Liftota. Okay, even like a little fork of Hekdesh needs 10 people. So even movables need 10. And the Mishnah said you need 3. Amalei Rav Papa Abaye, Bishlam Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, Damar Kashmuel. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov makes a lot of sense because he says like Shmuel. Now he doesn't say like Shmuel. Shmuel came after him. But we standing now see Shmuel and we say, what Shmuel said there fits perfectly with Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Damar Shmuel, Asara Kohanim Ktuvim b'Parasha, as I said, Kohen is mentioned 10 times there. And therefore he gets to 10. Ela l'Rabbanan Shloshim Analuhu. Where did the rabbis get 3? We're going to end our daf the way we started, which is semicha with 3, we really couldn't find a source for. We're also really not going to find a source for hekdesh with 3. So v'chitema dichtibu shlosha, because now it says Kohen 3 times by erchim. That was by the people, if you give the value of a person. It says Kohen 3 times by the animal, which is the metaltalin, the movables, and 4 times by land. So if you say, it says Kohen 3 times in that section, that would be a good explanation. But then karka'o dichtibu arba'at tizge ba'arba'at. But then by land, which it says it 4 times, should be fine with 4. Now, I told you the order. People, then movables, then land. So now you'll say, well, v'chitem achinami. Sorry, right. Now, if you say, really, maybe only it's 4 by land, alamatnan karka'o tisha v'kohen, but it says it's tisha 9 and a kohen. So it can't be it's 4. Elamai de mishlamahu bu asara. Well, maybe you'll say, by the time you get to the land, you already, if you go and kind of say it's all, each one adds, and what's the word? Accumulative. So in the end, you have 10. Maybe that's why. Well, then, hekdesh metaltalin, though, hekdesh mishalmabu shita libayu shita. Well, by the time you finish the metaltalin, you've had 6. So if you're going to say 10 for the land, because by the time you get there, cumulatively, you're up to 10 already. Well, by metaltalin, you should be at 6. And not 3. So we're left with kasha we don't really understand, and we're going to end our daf there. So we started with semicha with 3. We didn't really understand. We ended with hekdesh with 3 that we didn't really have a good source for. And we also pointed out, right, we had the whole story of Rabbi Yehuda and Bava. He also seemed to do it only with 1 person, but we added another 2 that just weren't mentioned. Then we had the whole question, who gave semicha to Rabbi Meir? It's a side point. Then we talked about there's no semicha in chutz la'aretz, and we talked about you can't do semicha distance either. You have to be in person. From there, we talked about some humble rabbis that didn't want the whole semicha thing and the whole glory of it. Then we got to Egla Arufa, where we saw there were 3 opinions, 3, 5, or maybe the whole entire Sanhedrin, and certainly had to include a Kohen and a Kohen Gadol and a king, and the king. And then we got to the Maser Sheni, what is Ein Dam Aviduim, and who are the 3? And then we ended with this Hekdesh, was also saying it's not like this other opinion, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, who says 10. And then we explained why he says 10, but we didn't really understand why the rabbis say 3. And with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a Chodesh Tov, Hanukkah Sameach, and bring the month that brings us some better news.